Hello, I'm Mary Madsen, and this lesson is to be done in June, and that whole month we are actually emphasizing the women of the Bible. And eventually today we will talk about Martha and Mary, but first I would like to tell you a little background. This is the scripture we're using comes from the book of John. And at the time he was writing, there was a local sect called Gnosticism. And these Gnostics were perfectly happy to believe that Jesus was divine. But they could not understand how he could claim to be human, since as far as they were concerned, human flesh was absolutely corrupt. And if he was divine, how could he be corrupt? If he was corrupt, how could he be divine? So one of John's purposes in his book was to convey the idea, the meaning, and the reality of incarnation, which is God made man. And I personally think that this story, which all of you will probably know about Mary and Martha and Lazarus, is a perfect example of how Jesus was both God and man. Now, one other thing about John's entire book, not just chapter 11, which we're using, but the entire book has what have been termed I am messages, which go right back to Exodus when Moses appeared at the burning bush, and he wanted to know who was he to say who sent him, and God answers, tell them I am. So I have here I am statements from the book of John. There's several. He says, I am the bread of life in chapter 6, verse 35. I am the light of the world, 8:12. I am the gate, 10:9. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. And I am the true vine. Now, that has to have some meaning, some connection with what God said to Moses at the burning bush. Now, we're talking only about chapter 11. We're not talking about the whole book of John. And this is the story, and people learn this, or I certainly learned this when I was a little child, about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Now, the thing here is they were very close friends of Jesus. They spent time together, they ate together. For all I know, he even spent time at their house, maybe spent the night, who knows. Anyway, the theme, which I think is very appropriate for this particular story, is that Jesus is both human and divine. He's both man and God, the resurrection and the life, which has been his message all the time. Although he's obviously a man, only God can restore life to a dead person. This story reinforces the dual aspects of Jesus' nature. And I'm going to read to you, and it might be a little lengthy, the verses from chapter 11 that we're using. This is the New International Version. Verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, this is more significant than you might think, because the people in that day felt that for 3 days the soul, the spirit of the departed remained. But by the 4th day, that soul, that spirit was gone. So the 4-day, arriving on the 4th day, would have had a great deal of significance to the people of that time. Our next little section is verses 20 to 29. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Now, Mary and Martha, they were sisters, but like so many sets of sisters, they were pretty different. Martha was the practical one. Mary, maybe the creative one, maybe the one who was a little more emotional. Certainly they were different, but they loved each other. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. but I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And again, you know, she knows her brother's dead, but she has faith that God, through Jesus, can do whatever. And the whatever in this case is going to astonish everyone. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again for the resurrection at the last day." But Jesus says to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, we're in verses 32 to 35. And again, you're going to hear the same thing that Martha said. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. And this is 38, part of 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And in verses 41 to 44, so they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." This whole story, of course, is for the benefit of the people standing there, the people reading this today, and the people all the way along. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And those, of course, were the burial garments that were used in those days. Now, this story goes on. If you want to know what happens after all of this, you can read chapter 11 of John. But for our purposes today, since our emphasis is on the women of the Bible, and Mary and Martha are our two women, they represent, I think, very human qualities here. They are borne down by grief, and who among us have not suffered terrible times of grief? They and the people around, and there are other people around. They're around them. When Jesus comes, they're around. I mean, people are there. And those people, I think of them as, sort of onlookers. If they lived today, they would have their phones out taking video of what's going on. So they are weeping and upset and hurt terribly. And they're especially, I think, irritated with Jesus because they sent him a message and said their brother was sick and asked him to come. And in their minds, I think they're thinking, well, he just fiddled about for 4 days. He's just now here. But he had a purpose. He had a purpose. Christ always had a purpose. And this purpose was to show not only is he human, not only does he cry at the death of his friend, not only is he moved when they get to the place where the tomb is. Those are human things. But he is God. Who but God could say, "Come forth, Lazarus," and Lazarus appears? The girls are a little hesitant for this to happen because it's been 4 days. They think the spirit is gone. They might think there was a smell, a stench from a body that was decaying. But Jesus doesn't pay any attention to them. He commands Lazarus to come forth, and Lazarus comes. So, astonishment. I mean, they're astonished, and so are all the people. I can see them standing around with their mouths all hanging open, saying, oh my goodness, what is going on here? And yet they might have been a little afraid. I mean, if I saw a body wrapped in grave clothes coming out from behind a stone, even if it were broad daylight, I would probably be a little afraid, and I think maybe they were too. Again, human qualities. Christ is not afraid. He knows exactly what he's doing, what's going to happen, and he conducts his miracle, and it was a miracle. And maybe we have miracles all around us today. We just don't have the smarts to see them. At any rate, I see these women as going through three human emotions. They're grieving. They are so disappointed that their friend Jesus didn't come when they asked. And the disciples also were really surprised that he didn't come. And of course Thomas, who always has a comment, generally on the sarcastic side, said, well, let's just all go. We can all die too, like Lazarus, which is, that's a Thomas thing. Anyway, and then the women were astonished at the end. And all of these things, these are human qualities that we undergo also. And I think the purpose of this lesson might be to have a little faith that things happen. We don't know actually what's going to happen. We don't know how that's going to come to be. But the experience of Mary and Martha would show that yes, God is there, God is with you. We don't have the human Jesus, but we have the Holy Spirit. We have God himself with us. And I think Mary and Martha certainly learned that. Now, one of the questions that has always bothered me since I learned this story is, why was Lazarus allowed to die? I mean, he was Jesus' friend. They liked each other. For all I know, they went fishing together. Who knows? But at any rate, they were certainly friends. And of course, we know now why Lazarus was allowed to die, so that Jesus could bring him back to life and demonstrate, while he's perfectly human, he is also perfectly God. And that has hung in my mind for years, since I was a little kid, actually. The whole purpose, I think, of looking at Mary and Martha, not just in this instance, but all through the stories that we have of them. You remember when Jesus came to visit once, and Martha runs off to the kitchen and starts making the biggest dinner she can possibly prepare, turkey, mashed potatoes, all those good things. And Mary did not do that. She sat at his feet and used an expensive perfume to wash his feet with. And Martha, scolding, of course, said, what are you doing out there? And other people said, Thomas, I think, said, that's a waste of money to use that perfume on his feet. We could sell that and use the money for the poor. But Jesus said, let her be. Let her show her devotion in this way. And in that, I used to laugh about this story because I've done lots of Marthas in my time. But it's, the whole point, I think, is there are different ways to show your love of God and of Jesus. Martha cooked and cleaned and, fixed a fresh bed and all that kind of stuff. And Mary was more worshipful, more outwardly worshipful. But there are many ways, and God sees them all, many, many ways to show your devotion to God. Thank you so much for listening and looking at me. I don't know if I like that very much, but anyway, that's what you've done. And I hope that I brought some kind of new thoughts to your mind, maybe about the story of Mary and Martha. Thanks again. I appreciate it.